So this is John chapter 1, and we're just reading verses 9 to 13. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. Thanks be to God for his word.
As Alison said, we've been slowly working our way through John chapter 1, what's called the prologue of John. It's like this dense, rich, beautiful load of stuff about the mystery and wonder and reality that God has somehow fully and finally come to his people in time and space with skin on, and that form that God has taken is Jesus. And so we've been reflecting on a little bit of that. But just to start us off, most of you probably know by now that I really enjoy running. That's not me running, by the way, just in case you thought it was someone else. And I know others into the church are really into this as well. Some people in this church probably can run twice as fast as me. But what some of you may not know is that I've only actually begun to enjoy running in the last couple of years. So it's been quite a recent thing for me. It was about 10 years ago that I ran the Bristol half marathon, the furthest that I had ever run at that time. But at the time, afterwards, I ended up suffering with all sorts of injuries, like really bad knee pain, despite wearing knee supports. I ended up basically had a really, really rough relationship with running ever since after that. But about 2 years ago, just after I had stepped down from being the pastor of Honiton Family Church, I decided to go and try a really short run. And, everyone's like, oh, being active is really good for you. I was like, okay, cool, I'll try it. But I ended up suffering with really tight shoulders and like neck cramp, and I got migraines, an aching lower back, and a shooting pain kind of through my knees and in my Achilles heel, and then pins and needles in my feet. And there were like these weird rushes, almost like psychedelic weird rushes of pain through my hamstrings as well. And I was like, so basically, this time 2 years ago, as far as I was concerned, running sucked. And like a lot of people, I had bought into the common idea that running is just simply bad for us. I finally worked it out. And there's good reason to think this, actually, because so many people get injured from running every year, especially in the Western Hemisphere. And I just figured that eventually all of us will just get worn down from trying to do it, so we may as well give up before it gets too bad, right? Now, as I've been reflecting this week, I can't help but wonder whether this is maybe a picture for some of us maybe this morning about how we've come to see life, or even being a Christian. Sometimes it can just seem so painful, so bleak, like an overwhelming dark slog. And the more you try to hang in there, the more you try to keep up with others along the way and do what you think you're supposed to be doing, the more it can sometimes hurt, actually, and make it harder to keep going, harder to believe, harder to trust God. I eventually just came to the decision that I wasn't born to run 2 years ago. And yet around that time, I came across this message, this theory that was going around, some stories about different people who could run tremendous distances and not get injured. What? People who seemed to run in a way that actually only made them kind of stronger. In contrast to me, the perspective for many of these folks was that running is not bad for us, but that many of us run badly. I heard, for example, about the Tarahumara people, who are this obscure tribe who live in the Copper Canyons in Mexico, whose whole culture and community revolves around running, cultivating a form and a style of running as a community that is good and which flows from the kind of natural biomechanics of the human body. And the longest recorded distance that any of the Tarahumara people has ever covered is 485 miles in 48 hours. Yeah, I know, bonkers. I don't think even Ben Alexander could do that. Maybe he could, actually. I don't know. But that's quite a lot further than my half marathon. One thing that is extraordinary about these people is that the older they get, the stronger they get and the greater their endurance becomes. The elder women and men are the strongest runners. And the one thing I like about this as well is that the longer the distance gets, the more equal it becomes in terms of the ability between the sexes. I like that. But I also found that there were many, many other people, that's the Tarahumara folks running, there were many people who had overcome extraordinary limitations, some that the world had put on them, or who have recovered from seemingly miraculously from a multitude of injuries or conditions, achieving what some people would consider to be medically impossible. And I witnessed these testimonies and these stories of so many people who would say that their own experience, that running is not bad for us, but that many of us just run badly. One of my own brothers even managed at this time to run over 100 kilometers. Bonkers, right? And so much as I was cautious and skeptical, I dared to believe that it might be true. And wondered if maybe I too might be able to experience running like this for myself. To run far, to run faster, to run free. And I'm now 40 years old, and I'm running further than I ever have, because I've been learning a dramatically different way to run. I won't bore you with all of the how, and running isn't really the focus of today's sermon, though I can see I've gripped some of your attentions. But I share this with you because for me, it's a parable that I think speaks about our lives and about our relationships with others, with the world, with ourselves, and our relationship with God. Running is not bad for us, but many of us run badly. Being human isn't bad for us. But many of us in this life get tripped up, or we trip up others, lose our way, maybe ignore the deep impulses in ourselves to adapt or to change how we live. Or we shirk the guidance of those who've gone before us because we think we're either better or less precious even. Some of us expect everyone to run the same way that I do, and we put unhelpful expectations on them, whilst some of us are just driven forward not by the joy of the journey, but by obligation or fear or shame, or a need to somehow prove something that can just make it hard to live as though we're loved. Many of us at times, for multiple reasons, end up living badly, bumpily, bruisingly, and maybe even run over others along the way at times. Ever since human beings existed, we have had this continual inclination to take the wayward paths, the ones that can get us lost. And we sometimes trip and fall. We injure ourselves and others and move through this life in a way that damages the humanity that God has given us. And even those of us that call on the name of the Lord have crafted these ridiculous ideas of who we think God is, and therefore who we think we are. Since the human race was born, we've made up our own ideas of what is good and what is evil, what is right and true, and we've then called that God. Time and time again, people have claimed God for their own, and God gets wielded like some sort of violent puppet or toy for the hubris of human agendas as an attempt to control the world and its maker. God is evoked through the wealth and the prosperity that nations accumulate through conquest, enslavement, and deceit. God is evoked when people experience earthly blessings which come at the cost of hell on earth for others. God is claimed to be on the side of one person or people group, whilst those who disagree with them or question them are marginalised or condemned. We've made a God out of wealth and financial security, out of the ideal imaginings of a perfect family, or what a good citizen is based on our particular social norms. We worship frenetic busyness, the stiff upper lip maybe, particular diets or particular political ideologies. And in some ways, just like the Jewish people in first century Palestine, we too have longed for God, but so often merely just grasp at ourselves and our great ideas and religious notions of God. And the God of the Bible eludes us at times, and we stumble in the darkness of our own rigid and hollow form of running a religion. And as a result, we live this human life in ways that can be damaging, destructive, and frankly, not remotely appealing to anyone else. Because for those who dare to be real about life, such a God seems kind of like a waste of effort. Much like running the wrong way will eventually take its toll. So why would you do that? And perhaps this is exactly why, when the true and the real and the authentic God fully showed up, enfleshed in the world, so many people didn't actually recognize him. They didn't perceive him. The world was made through him, as the verse says. And this wasn't just like an arbitrary divine project. God loved what he'd made. It was tov ma'od, deeply pleasing, very good. And it belonged to him. God cherished everything that he'd nurtured out of nothing. And yet God's creation didn't recognize God when God showed up on its doorstep. So many people were probably expecting a different God. And so Jesus was unrecognizable. For a start, he seemed a little bit less strict and rigid in his adherence to the Torah and the teachings of the law. He spent time with undesirables, like the sick and the unclean, Gentiles even, outsiders. And he didn't seem bothered about fame or status. A lot of what Jesus said was weird, guys. It's okay. It was weird. And he called people to follow him who were traitors to God and God's people, folks like tax collectors. And what's more, Jesus didn't appear to have a very clear and tangible strategy or goal for defeating the Romans. How about that for a failure to have a business plan? For many people, he just really wasn't very impressive. He didn't fit into what people imagined God should be like. He maybe even contradicted certain ideas about who God is and therefore what God should do. And the world didn't recognize him. His own did not recognize him. And in many ways, this passage is referring to the Jewish people who didn't perceive who Jesus was, even though they were made and they were called through him. But the writer of John also intentionally writes many times in a way that has multiple meanings. And he's also referring to all of humanity. After all, everyone in the world was made through him. Jesus. Yet even today, even those who claim to be God's people, we can be a bit sluggish at times in recognizing Jesus when he surprises us or confronts us from beyond what we think he should be like. I mean, we all prefer a predictable God, don't we? Maybe that's why we often find ourselves at times looking to money or busyness or different forms of security, popularity, etc., because we know what we're going to get with those things. And because we so often fail to perceive who the true God really is, we can end up doing all sorts of things that make it really hard for others to witness and to know the true God too. It's a bit like being a runner who persists in just running the same way or giving up because they have no idea that they actually could learn to run differently. And change is hard, right? I'm still trying to unlearn the form of running that I've basically been doing for most of my life. Running is not bad for us, but many of us run badly. In Jesus' time, just like ours, many different people and people groups misjudged who God was. Some wanted God, frankly, to be their superhero, like Batman. Or, other superheroes are available. Others wanted God to be their moral guru. Some wanted God to be their political figurehead. Others wanted God to crush their enemies. And some wanted God to prosper them or to fix all of their issues. And to be fair, who wouldn't want a God like that? I do at times. But Jesus comes along and he is barely recognizable as God, as the Messiah, the chosen one, because he does not show himself to be the sort of Messiah that people expect or desire or imagine him to be. God's people were desperate for a Savior, for liberation, for a return to all that God had made them to be. But along came Jesus, who was not what they were expecting. And so often he's not what we are expecting. We want answers. But Jesus calls himself the way. We want security, but Jesus offers us faith. We want a smoother ride, but Jesus merely gives us his peace. And we want to see change, and yet Jesus seeks to change us. We want the good life, and Jesus will ask us to lay our lives down for the sake of eternal life. We long for God sometimes to just give us a break. And instead, Jesus is broken for us. First in heart and mind, and then in his body, as God's act of love for the whole world. This is a strange message. It's difficult to believe at times. A God who is hard to comprehend. And yet, if we can believe the strangeness, believe the outrage, believe the scandal of who God says that God is, that this man who walked amongst us is actually God. If we can put our confidence in him and open ourselves to him, to his way of being human, maybe we might experience a type of living that is somehow more real than what we often embrace. Something more true, more authentic. Yes, still painful at times, but far more worth it and far more free than we could ever have dreamed on our own. If Jesus is God, and if God probably knows better than all of us how we're made to live, then maybe following Jesus is a good shout. I never used to enjoy running, and I still find myself having injuries, dysfunction, falling over. Though every opportunity now is a chance to learn and to grow rather than to think that somehow I should stop. And at times I just feel like I could run forever. Every step I take is a chance to relearn who I am, to move and to breathe as though I'm loved when I run, because I'm running with Jesus. I couldn't imagine how these Tara Hamara people could do what they do. But they just moved the way that they were born to, and they are free. Running is not bad for us, but many of us run badly. And what if Jesus is offering each of us today, no matter how many times we might have said or called on his name, what if he is offering us today a chance to relearn again how to be human? We may know him, but have found ourselves at times locked into a form of following that mars the image of God in us or in others around us. And Jesus calls us. He is real. He is the only true human, and he is good. He is trustworthy. He's not easy to follow at times, but he's worth it. And with him there is true freedom, the sort of freedom that comes from believing deep down in your heart and mind and soul and body that you are not a mistake, that you are God's child, and you are eternally loved, and you're welcome to accompany him by his side through this life and into eternity. Amen.